Alright, so now we're going to start looking at some stuff to make your lives much easier. Now, in our hotel website project, we used floats to align things, which is a pain in the neck for so many reasons. And for a long time, we had to use frameworks like Bootstrap. And one of the biggest reasons for that was it came with a grid system to easily align elements, so we didn't have to use floats. But Flexbox was introduced in CSS version 3, which allows us to align things easily without using floats or frameworks. So from now on, we're going to do away with floats and use Flexbox and or CSS Grid when we get to that. Okay, so Flexbox is basically a modern layout mode in CSS3. We assign flex to the display property, just like we have display block, display inline block, display none. We also have display flex, and it replaces floats. It's much more elegant to work with. We can align items both horizontal and vertical, and flex items can also be reordered via CSS. So we can actually reorder the way that our items are laid out without having to change the markup, without having to change the HTML. So let's take a quick look at how it works, and I'm going to show you all of this, so don't worry about it. But just really quickly, if we assign display flex to a container div or any container element, it creates a flex container. Okay, and we can look at this image here. So let's say that these two boxes are divs inside of a div that we said display flex. Okay, so we have a flex container, and then it makes all direct elements flex items. Okay, so each div or list item, it could be any element at all. Each thing inside that flex container is going to be a flex item, and it's going to actually align horizontal in a row by default. So simply putting display flex is going to make all the child elements just automatically align horizontally. So basically like what floats do. But we can also do flex direction column, which will align them this way. Okay, that'll align them vertically. Now we have a cross axis which goes up and down, and we have a main axis that goes this way. And there's different CSS properties we can use to align our flex items. So here's some of those properties. So we have justify content, which will align along the main axis, so basically horizontal along this main axis. We have align items, which will align items on the cross axis, so this way, and then align content, which will align when there's extra space in the cross axis. Basically, if we have multiple rows of flex items, it'll align those. And I know that's confusing just saying it, but I will show you. Okay, so now we're going to start to get into Flexbox. I want to show you how to create a Flexbox or a flex container and flex items within it and how to align them in a row or a column. So in our CSS sandbox, I'm going to create a new file called 16 underscore, and we'll call this flex underscore basics.html. And we'll create a quick boilerplate here. Let's say flex basics and style. So I'm just going to add some default styling. We'll set the box sizing to border box, and I just want to add a font family onto the body so it doesn't look, really ugly. So I'll set this to Arial. Now in the body here, we're going to have a class, a div with the class of flex container, and this doesn't have to be a div. It could be a UL. It could be absolutely anything. It can be a flex container or a flex box, and then each direct child will be a flex item, and that could be images, divs, list items, and you could have them like you could have an image and then you could have a div, and these would both be direct elements, so they'd be flex items. But we're going to have 3 divs, so let's create a div with the class of item and then item 1, and here we'll have an h3 and we'll say item 1, and let's just copy this down. We'll have 3 of these, and it doesn't matter how many you have, they'll still align correctly. So this will be item 2 and item 2 for the class, item 3. And I'm only given these specific classes here because we haven't gotten into pseudo selectors, which is what I would use normally to access these. So we actually wouldn't need these extra classes, but I don't want to do stuff that we haven't got into yet. Now up here, I'm just going to style the items so we can tell them apart better, because right now they're just H3s. In fact, I can just open this up in Live Server, and let's make this a little smaller. We can close this up because I want to be able to see both of these at the same time, but have enough room here. Okay, so for the item, let's style this. Let's give it a background. Excuse me. Let's do a light gray. Okay, so light gray background. We'll do a border. Solid, and let's do 2 pixels. Okay, so we have a border. We'll space them apart with a margin, add some padding. It already has padding, but we'll make it 10 pixels. And let's do text align to the center, and let's also do a border radius of 10 pixels. Now, if I want to align these side by side, with Flexbox, it's incredibly easy. We just take the Flex container, whatever that may be. In this case, it's just a div with the class Flex container, and we just set the display property. So remember, we have display block, we have inline block. We also have Flex as an option. And as soon as I do that, it turns it into a Flexbox. Okay, and we automatically have certain alignment properties and stuff that we can use. We also have properties to basically change the widths of these to fill up the entire row, which I'm going to get into in the next video. But for now, I'm just going to set this to a width. So the item I'm setting to a width of 200 pixels. So each one of these items are going to be 200 pixels. And it doesn't matter how many of these we have. Like, we can add an extra one here. And we could add anything. Like if I put an H1, as long as it's a direct child of Flex container, it's going to be put into the Flexbox and added to the row. Now we can also change the direction or the orientation of our Flexbox. So by default, let's say Flex direction, by default it's a row, which goes horizontal. And in a row, this is the main axis and this is the cross axis. Now I can change this to a column, and then they're going to be stacked on top of each other. Now this is the main axis of the Flexbox, and this is the cross axis. Okay, so the axis changes depending on the direction. And we can also do column reverse. And now notice that item 3 is on top, so that will reverse it. We can also do row reverse, and it'll actually align to this side, and then item 1 is at the end. Okay, but I'm just going to keep this at row. In fact, we don't even need to use it because that's the default anyway. Now, before we move on to the next video and look at some other properties, the last one I want to show you here is Flex Wrap. Okay, so by default, we have this set to, I believe it's no wrap, where if we make this smaller, you'll see that they just shrink up until they can't shrink anymore. But if we have Flex Wrap set to wrap and we go ahead and shrink this, notice how when we get to a certain size they basically move on to the next row. Okay, so I mean, it really just depends on how you want your layout, but I'm not going to use Flex Wrap, so I'm going to comment that out. So in the next video I want to go over how we can change the widths, because you might not always want just a fixed width. For your items, you might want to have one take up, a certain fraction of the page and another a certain fraction. So we're going to get into properties like flex grow, flex shrink, and the flex property itself.